All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the current, the North Central Region Water Network Speed Networking webinar series. My name is Ann Nardi, and I am a marketing manager with the North Central Region Water Network, and I'll be the facilitator for today's session. For those that may not be familiar with the North Central Region Water Network, we are a 12-state extension-led collaboration that is working to ensure safe and sufficient water supplies across the North Central region. We host this webinar series on a monthly basis for water resource professionals like yourselves on a range of different water topics. Today, our topic is perennial agricultural systems and water quality. So we frame it as a speed networking webinar series because we have actually today, 4 great speakers with us that are each going to give a little bit of an oversight of their work, and then we're going to have a Q&A discussion. We often, when we talk about nutrient pollution or nitrate leaching, we often are talking about the result of many of our annual cropping systems. So today we're going to focus on perennial agricultural systems, where they fit into the landscape and what their impact is on water quality. So a couple housekeeping things before we get started. So after all 3 of our presentations, we will have a Q&A session. So please put your questions for our speakers in the Q&A panel. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. We also have a chat feature on the webinar, which you can use if you're having any technical issues or if you'd like to share links with other attendees today, or if our speakers will be sharing any links. But if you do have questions for our speakers that you'd like to get to in the Q&A, please make sure to do that in the Q&A panel, just so that we can keep track of them and we don't miss any of them. Also, you do have the option to upvote. So if you have a question and someone asked a really similar question, feel free to upvote that. That will move it to the top of our list, and we'll try to get to those questions that are the most popular first. If we run out of time for questions, which we very well might, we will be providing the email addresses of our presenters today should you have a burning question. If you are having any issues with audio, you can use the phone in option. You can do that by clicking up on the mute icon and then clicking switch to phone audio. This session will be recorded. We post all of our sessions as well as the PowerPoint presentations from today's session on our website, northcentralwater.org. You can go to northcentralwater.org/media archive and find all the recordings from all 8 years of the current webinar series. All right, great. So let's dive in here. I mentioned we have 3 great speakers. Very excited to talk about perennial agricultural systems in a couple different ways. First, we're going to start with Jake Jungers with the University of Minnesota. He's going to be talking about water quality and nitrate leaching as it relates to Kernza. And then we have 2 speakers who are students or postdocs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they are working with AgroIBIS, a modeling system, and going to be talking about grassland agriculture and its impact on water quality using a model to look at the differences that may result in terms of ecosystem services. That's Anna Orfandu and Hunter Mackin. And last, we're going to switch a little bit of gears and talk more programmatically with Shelby Best with the American Farmland Trust, talking about bioenergy perennial crops and the program that she's running out of American Farmland Trust. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I mentioned Jake is up first. Very excited to have Jake here talking about Kernza and its impact on water quality, looking at a couple different sites across Minnesota. Kernza is a crop that's gotten a lot of attention recently, and so it's very interesting to see how that might be integrated into some of our ongoing annual systems or ongoing management. So I won't read his full bio, but I will just stop sharing and give it over to Jake.
Right. Thanks so much, Ann, and thanks so much to you all for tuning in today. I'm going to share my screen. Yep, so I'll be talking about Kernza, the world's first perennial grain crop, commercially viable perennial grain crop, and how it can mitigate nitrate leaching in Minnesota and really beyond. So we're just going to set the stage by taking a look at a national perspective of nitrate leaching And we can see by this map that the hotspots are in the upper Midwest and the Great Plains, where we have a lot of annual row crop agriculture. And just a reminder that when nitrate contaminates groundwater, it's also contaminating the drinking water sources of most rural communities in the upper Midwest. And there are some human health implications to that, such as blue baby syndrome, increased risks of cancer, thyroid diseases. So zooming in just a little bit to take a closer look at Minnesota, because I'll be sharing with you a lot of data from our work on Kernza in Minnesota. Here in Minnesota, all of the dots on this map actually indicate private wells. The small dots are private wells. The larger dots are municipal wells that have groundwater sources that are elevated nitrate levels, and these levels are above the EPA's safe drinking limit of 10 parts per million. And after the survey, the state found that 13% of all private wells exceeded this safe drinking limit. And there are also some hot spots in our state, including the Central Sand Plains region, as you can see in the center of the state, where 30% of all wells exceeded that limit. And this not only presents some human health concerns, but also economic concerns. It's quite expensive to treat these drinking water supplies. In some regions, some small communities, it's up to over $7,000 per household on average. So in response, the state has defined these wellhead protection areas. You may have also heard the term drinking water supply management area. That acronym is referred to as DWISMAs. DWISMAs and wellhead protection areas are not exactly the same, but pretty close. And this map shows the wellhead protection areas in Minnesota. And these are areas where nitrate can enter the drinking water supply. And these are spread out across the state of Minnesota, really based on geology and proximity to drinking water sources. So across the state, there are 1.2 million acres of these wellhead protection areas. And each one is ranked in terms of its vulnerability. And the very most vulnerable, the highly vulnerable wellhead protection areas, there are about 360,000 acres in Minnesota. And about a third of all of these highly vulnerable wellhead protection areas are farmed in annual row crops. So this is what we're going to be focusing on, looking to replace some of these annual row crops with perennials. And here's why this is a challenge. A lot of the annual row crops in the vulnerable wellhead protection areas in Minnesota are covered in corn or soybeans. And when they are planted to corn, fertilizers are applied. The average rate in Minnesota says 138 pounds. We know that many counties in Minnesota, the rate is quite a bit higher than that. Only about 40% of that fertilizer is taken up by the corn. And then somewhere between 25 and 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year can be lost to the groundwater. And there are a lot of estimates about this number. This is just a range from a couple of decades of research in our state here. The one potential crop that could replace the annual row crops is Kernza. This is the world's first commercially viable perennial grain crop. Kernza is the trademark name for the grain that's harvested from intermediate wheatgrass. Intermediate wheatgrass is the species, and it's been in the United States for 100 years. And we've been domesticating this to function as a grain crop in just the last 40 years. It has a deep, dense root system, as you can see from this photo, which is great for assimilating the nitrogen that's in the soil water, as well as providing other ecosystem services like potential soil carbon sequestration, as well as improvements in soil health. So we've been doing some research on Kernza for almost 10 years now. Some of that research has looked at how much nitrogen fertilizer the crop needs. And we have developed the best management practices for nitrogen fertilizer rates of about 70 pounds per acre, quite a bit less than some of our annual row crops. And this makes sense. The crop has a deep, dense root system. It's really good at capturing any nitrogen that's applied. We can see that the nitrogen use efficiency is higher than that of some annual row crops. And as a result, there's just a lot less nitrate leaching below the system, below the rooting zone. And that's the take-home story of the talk, but I want to tell you just a little bit about how we got there through this research. but more importantly, how rural communities and other stakeholder groups in our region have responded and taken action to implement this new solution. As with many technological innovations in agriculture, this started with plot scale research. So we conducted a study almost 10 years ago now, it was initiated, where we worked to estimate nitrate leaching beneath Kernza, switchgrass, another perennial crop, as well as corn. And we did this study at 5 sites over 3 years, and we applied our plots with different levels of nitrogen fertilizer. And we used lysimeters to measure the amount of nitrate that was in the soil solution below the rooting zone. And a lysimeter is an instrument that we install into the soil, and we put a suction on it, and then it takes up some of that soil solution, and then we can excavate that and then analyze it for the amount of nitrogen that's in that water. So it's not exactly a measure of nitrate leaching, but it measures the amount of nitrogen that's in the water that could make it to the groundwater. So here's a former grad student, Evelyn Riley, installing a lysimeter in a field of Kernza. And on the left is some data from our lysimeter. This is showing the concentration of nitrate in the soil solution. And we have corn, switchgrass, and Kernza throughout the growing season. And I highlighted that safe drinking limit set by the EPA of 10 parts per million or milligrams per liter. And we can see that there is quite a bit of nitrate below the rooting zone early in the spring, when the corn roots are not very large and in some case barely even planted. But the Kernza, the levels are considerably lower. So our first indication that this crop could be good at capturing nitrate and preventing leaching. So by measuring many other things, including soil moisture at different depths throughout the growing season, we're able to create a model to actually predict how much nitrogen was lost from those fields in a given year. So this value is nitrate leached in pounds per acre throughout the course of a year. And on average, from our corn plots, it was about 19.3 pounds per acre, which is even on the lower end of that range I presented before. Our perennials showed 3.3 and 0.2 for Kernza. So 99% reduction compared to corn, really almost 2 orders of magnitude less. So these results captured the attention of a lot of different stakeholders across the state, including agencies, SWCDs, and farmers, municipalities. And we worked together to develop a project to scale this up. That's really the next step. We started doing some on-farm work in the Lincoln Pipestone region, where we planted large wellhead protection area fields to Kernza and instrumented those fields. We also worked in the southeast part of the state in Chatfield, as well as doing more research at stations now in the Central Sands region, focusing there, looking at corn soybean rotations. And in these large demonstration fields, we had field days, extension events, outreach events to start to spread the word and showcase some of the results from this work. And this then continued to expand. We had more communities get involved, interested, identified the resources and funding, and worked together to get the grants to just expand this work. And now we have over 120 acres. This is just a couple of years ago, 120 acres of wellhead protection areas, additional covered in Minnesota down the Laverne Pipestone area. This is with farmers working with soil water conservation districts and a farmer here highlighted in the photo. And again, with all of these demonstration fields, we are monitoring as well as even doing some more experiments. So at the Westport Rochalt Research Farm, we are looking at the effects of irrigation on Kernza, alfalfa, and prairie. So taking a look at prairie now as the gold standard side-by-side experiment, seeing how well Kernza performs compared to that. And this work has actually resulted into some changes in policy and some financial support to actually implement this solution. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture and the university's Forever Green Initiative have developed the ECO program, Economic and Environmental Clusters of Opportunity. And this program actually pays farmers to plant Kernza in wellhead protection areas. There's a per acre payment. It also provides resources to these growers, including support for developing the supply chains, the processing facilities to get the Kernza to market, as well as technical assistance to assist growers to making sure that this could be economically viable, those early adopters. And this work in Minnesota is sort of serving as a model for other states. And that model is being supported by USDA NIFA CAP grant called Kernza CAP. We have 81 collaborators, 11 different universities participating. And in this project, we're really focusing on the modeling aspects and seeing if we can scale up our Kernza model to work in multiple states outside of Minnesota. And just to wrap things up, you might be asking, well, how can you get involved? Well, you could drink and eat Kernza. There are lots of Kernza products available regionally and nationally. If you prefer to drink it, there are a few different alcoholic beverages that can be consumed. The Long Root Ale is available across the West Coast. Here in the Twin Cities, we have local breweries brewing beer. You can eat it for breakfast. You can eat it as a pancake mix that's just coming out from the Kodiak. And Cascadian Farms has a cereal with Kernza in it, and that is a General Mills product. Or you can buy some noodles, or you can buy your own flour through Perennial Pantry, a local startup company here. You can buy that online and make your own Kernza products. I just want to quickly thank all of the students who did a lot of this research in the lab, and acknowledge all the different stakeholders who helped with this work and partnered, and the funding agencies. I think we'll take questions at the end. There are some resources here that are in the last slide that you will have available to you. Lots of links in here for additional information. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jake. I know there's been a lot of interest in Kernza, at least in the last 5 years, probably longer than that. And so it's great to get some of the data in terms of its impact on water quality. And I know I personally have seen the Patagonia Kernza beer, though I personally have not tried it out. Okay, moving to our next presenters, we're actually going to be taking a little bit of a turn and doing a little bit of a presentation on modeling. This is with Hannah Orfanu and Hunter Macon. Anna, I apologize. And they are both with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Anna is a postdoc in the Department of Agronomy, and Hunter is a student at the Nelson Institute of Environmental Studies. They're going to be talking about grassland agriculture and doing modeling to look at if we changed some of the acreage that right now might be in corn, silage, for example, and did grassland agriculture as an alternative. Maybe how would that impact some of the ecosystem services and specifically water quality? So excited to have them on the call today and hear a little bit about their work with AgroIBIS, the model that they're using. So I will stop sharing and turn it over to them.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Hi, everyone. I am Anna Orfanu. I'm a modeler, and I work as a research associate at the Department of Agronomy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'm presenting today with Hunter Macon. Hunter?
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. You're just a little bit hard to hear. So just wanted to note if you could speak a little bit louder for us.
Yeah.
Sweet. And I am Hunter Macon. I am also a modeler and a graduate student in the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. And today we'll be talking about some work titled Perennial Grassland Agriculture Restores Critical Ecosystem Functions in the U.S. Upper Midwest. This work was recently published in Frontiers in Sustainable Food Systems and was coincidentally edited by Professor Jacob Junkers, who you just heard from. In this study, we were primarily concerned with how ecosystem service profiles compare across some common farming approaches. Before we get into it, I want to highlight our other co-authors, Carl Webking, Zach Raff, Devendra Shrestha, Eric Booth, Chris Kucharik, Claudio Graton, and Randy Jackson, and also the USDA grant which funded our work, Grassland 2.0. So what are we talking about when we talk about ecosystem services? This figure from Foley et al. In 2005 highlights some notable trade-offs across a few ecosystem types. First and foremost, we have a natural or more minimally managed ecosystem. These ecosystems tend to be exceptional at things like carbon sequestration, preserving habitats and biodiversity, water quality regulation, and water flow regulation. Alternatively, intensive annual croplands tend to be exceptional at crop production, but exceptionally poor at just about every other ecosystem service. Naturally, crop production is one of the most immediately important ecosystem services to all of us. However, there are ways to manage croplands that provision all of these ecosystem services, including food. In particular, today we will be talking about comparing perennial grasslands with 2 annual cropping systems and their ability to balance food production, water quality in the context of nutrient retention, and water quantity. This infographic put out by Grassland 2.0 looks at Vernon County, which is where we conducted 2 of our on-farm simulations. At a glance, Vernon County has incurred over $125 million in flood damage costs since the year 2000 alone, and had a dozen presidential disaster declarations since 1990. Clearly, increasing water infiltration in this region is a high priority to reduce flood risk, and existing land management techniques such as crop rotation, no-till, cover cropping, and perennial grass integration can substantially improve infiltration. This improved infiltration has the additional benefit of reducing nutrient runoff. Nutrient leaching can also be reduced substantially with many of these techniques, with less nutrient inputs and the better nutrient uptake that comes with more continuous living cover. For this study, we picked 3 common land uses in the upper Midwest to focus on: continuous corn, a corn-soy rotation, and perennial grasslands. We then picked 5 farms, 2 in Vernon County in the Southwest, and 3 in Marathon County in the North Central. And then we compare a number of ecosystem services, particularly food energy production for dairy and dairy beef, water dynamics, and nutrient retention. We used an agroecosystem model called AgroIBIS to simulate water dynamics and nutrient retention, but used a slightly different approach for food energy production. For this, we used historical cropping data for each farm to generate average farm level output. By utilizing that past output, we were then able to create a target output for counterfactual simulations between each of these types and examine food energy in the form of milk and dairy beef. Alternatively, AgroIBIS is able to simulate each of these common land uses and examine our water dynamics and nutrient retention components. Briefly, AgroIBIS, which was developed by Chris Kucharik here at UW-Madison in the early 2000s, simulates the movement of water, carbon, nutrients, and energy across different land cover types. Simulations for each land use at each farm provides us with annual output for 37 years, so from 1979 to 2016. Now, Anna will show you some of the results.
Thank you, Hunter. Initially, I will discuss our research findings regarding food and energy production across the various cropping systems that were evaluated in this study. Our research highlighted that across all cropping systems, the same level of harvested dry matter produced higher amounts of food energy in the form of milk compared to dairy beef. Also, continuous corn had the highest food energy output, producing approximately 60% more milk energy and beef energy than the corn, soybean rotation, and grass. However, no significant differences in food energy production was observed between corn, soybean rotation, and grass for both milk and dairy beef output. Regarding water dynamics, according to AgroIBIS, evapotranspiration was found to be higher in Vernon County compared to Marathon County. Additionally, our research showed that the grass system had the lowest evapotranspiration, while the continuous corn had the highest. It's worth noting that higher evapotranspiration corresponds to higher water demand, which could result in a greater need for irrigation. Therefore, continuous corn and corn soybean rotation systems would require more water compared to grass systems to help with the growth and development of the crops. The drainage trends were found to be opposite to the evapotranspiration. Specifically, the grass system showed the highest annual drainage, while continuous corn had the lowest. This means that over the course of the 38-year study, the grassland promoted higher water drainage, potentially resulting in more infiltration and less runoff compared to the other two systems. It should be highlighted that the systems that promote higher evapotranspiration and lower recharge, such as the grass system, can have a direct impact on the volume of water. As a result, they don't tend to deplete groundwater levels as much as continuous corn or corn soybean rotation systems might. As for nutrient retention, based on our simulations, it was observed that the levels of nitrate leaching, total and sediment phosphorus were significantly lower in the grass systems, while significantly higher in the continuous corn system. It's important to note that among the three crops, corn, soybean, and grass, only corn received both fertilizer and manure, which suggests that these results were influenced by management practices. When we analyze nitrate leaching across the 5 farms and 2 regions separately within the grass vegetation, we observed that it varied by region. Specifically, Marathon County exhibited greater leaching than Vernon County. This difference can be attributed to variation in precipitation between the 2 counties. To sum up, our study evaluated 3 cropping systems in terms of a variety of ecosystem services in 2 counties located in Wisconsin. From a dairy perspective, corn had the highest food energy production in the form of milk and beef compared to the other 2 systems. However, grassland resulted in better water dynamics with lower evapotranspiration and higher drainage, potentially reducing the risk of runoff and flooding. Additionally, grassland outperformed the other 2 systems in terms of nutrient retention with significantly lower levels of nitrate leaching, total phosphorus, and sediment phosphorus loss through runoff. Overall, our findings suggest that grassland can be more environmentally sustainable option, particularly in terms of water and nutrient management. One of the great advantages of using models is that they allow us to conduct research beyond a particular location. For our future work, we are planning to use AgroIBIS to run scenarios across the USA from single points to larger regions, such as the whole area of the corn belt of the United States. Our goal is to assess the ecosystem services provided by a range of cropping systems. Specifically, we are currently working on integrating winter cereal cover crops into AgroIBIS with the intention of including legumes and broadleaves as well. By doing so, we aim to explore different scenarios with and without cover crops and identify the optimal cover crop species for enhancing grower profitability, while also promoting climate mitigation and water quality. And now Hunter will tell us some more words about grazing.
Thank you, Anna. Similarly, we are now evaluating an updated grassland model and a new grazing model. AgroIBIS will then have the capability to simulate a 2-day rotation and continuous grazing, and future work will explore grazed cover crops as well. With these additions, we will better be able to identify the potential impacts of more continuous living cover. Thank you so much for listening. You can reach each of us with our emails provided here.
Great. Thank you so much, Hunter and Anna. All right, let me share my screen again. Oh, excuse me. All right, so our third presenter is Shelby Best. And we're actually going to be doing a little bit of a turn. So we've talked about 2 different research projects on perennial agricultural systems and their impact on water quality. Shelby is with a program manager with the American Farmland Trust in the Midwest region and is going to be talking about the Perennial Bioenergy Crops project, primarily based in Illinois. So Shelby, thanks so much for joining us today. I will hand over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. And we'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. Just checking that you all see the view you were supposed to see and not presenter view.
Looks great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So, hey everyone, good afternoon. As Anne had mentioned, I'm taking a little bit of a turn here from research to focus a little bit more on the program side, and I'm going to talk to you about perennial bioenergy crops. But first, I want to give you a little bit of an overview about AFT and who we are. So, American Farmland Trust was founded in 1980 to save America's farms and ranches. AFT is a national nonprofit that works to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. You may recognize us most by our No Farms, No Food stickers. Also, if you want a free one, let me know. We're a membership based organization with 7, soon to be 8 regional offices where staff can focus on local needs. In the Midwest, AFT works with farmers, landowners, and conservation partners to improve the health of our soil and water. And as you can see, we have staff located throughout the Midwest region, with most located in Illinois. At AFT, we also engage in a variety of programming related to agriculture and water quality. In Illinois, AFT has worked in the Upper Macoupin Creek and the Vermilion Headwaters watersheds to reduce phosphorus and nitrogen and nutrient loss. We also strive to help meet the goals of the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy, which include reaching a 25% reduction in total phosphorus loads and a 15% reduction in nitrate and nitrogen loads. And then I included a photo here is from a field day we hosted last year in the Vermilion Headwaters watershed, where we featured a cover crop robot demonstration, which just highlights some of the work that we do. And since we started our water quality programming, we have secured over $3.1 million in funding towards conservation practices and improving soil and water quality in the region. And so now I'm going to give a brief overview of the project that we are working on with Argonne National Lab. So this project is related specifically to perennial bioenergy crop diversification in the Midwest. So in a collaboration between American Farmland Trust and Argonne National Laboratory, we are exploring how to support the transition of portions of land to grow perennial bioenergy crops, repurpose marginal, less productive land, provide additional economic opportunities, and develop a tool for planning around perennial bioenergy crops. AFT is supporting this project in 2 key areas: outreach and technical assistance. Regarding outreach, to date, we have performed many stakeholder interviews and listening sessions for farmers, industry professionals, researchers, and soil and water conservation districts. Last year, we also formed the Midwest Bioenergy Crop Coalition to gather people from a variety of fields together to discuss how to move the bioenergy industry forward in the Midwest. This year, we'll be offering technical assistance to farmers and landowners, both in the form of workshops and the development of farm management plans. My colleague Marley and I are the project leads, team leads for this project at AFT, and we also have folks from our water quality, climate, and soil health teams who are working on this project. And to dive in a little bit deeper, I'd like to talk more about some of our perennial bioenergy crops that we're exploring during this project. So while you can make any perennial a bioenergy crop, there are particular perennials that perform better for these purposes. And for this project, we are focusing on the following list you see here. So that includes switchgrass, miscanthus, shrub willow, native prairie mixes, perennial sorghum, and hybrid poplar. There are 2 main types of biomass used in bioenergy: woody and leafy biomass. And in this table here, you'll see a little bit of a comparison between the 2. So for example, our woody biomass, some examples include shrub willow or hybrid poplar. These typically take 3 to 5 years to become established. And then as far as harvesting goes, typically every 3 to 4 years with a roughly 20-year lifespan. As far as equipment needs, for woody biomass, there is a little bit more specialty equipment needed that can increase costs regarding harvesting, planting, and coppicing. But however, the energy density from this type of biomass is quite high. And this is in comparison to some of the leafy biomass, which include miscanthus, switchgrass, perennial sorghum, or prairie mix. It only takes about a year or so to get established, and then you can harvest that on an annual basis using conventional seeding and baling equipment that are readily available. But in contrast, the energy density is a bit on the lower side in comparison to woody biomass. And so Argonne and AFT believe that combining bioenergy crops with water quality goals can result in a win-win situation for both the farmer and those concerned with water quality. And so why is there this focus then on perennial bioenergy crops? Well, we feel that the characteristics are ideal for removing excess nutrients and preventing erosion. And some of those characteristics include above ground biomass growth, deep roots, high nutrient water use efficiencies. It also, research has shown it can take advantage of excess nutrients to grow a crop that the farmer can then use and sell, which help to increase farm profitability and viability. And then research has also shown that this can help increase wildlife biodiversity and ecosystem services in the area. And for this project, we're focusing specifically on the conversion of marginal lands from conventional crops to perennial bioenergy crops. And so why is that? Why marginal lands? Well, there's a few reasons we're focusing on this to start. So marginal areas on fields are typically exit points for water pollutants. Using marginal areas can also be more economically viable for farmers and increase their willingness to engage in these types of practices and implement these projects. And then also focusing on marginal areas minimizes potential unintentional land use changes. This would include, as an example, the changing of conservation land to perennial bioenergy crops. And so, while a lot of research has been done in this field, there are still gaps that remain and challenges that need to be overcome. I've listed a few of them here, such as right now there is a big uncertain market for biomass, and this really impacts the farmer's willingness to adopt these practices. And so, with no set market, it's quite hard to get farmers to start doing this. Additionally, there is a very high cost of establishment to get started, particularly related to some of the woody biomass that I showed earlier. And then as far as marginal area, logistics, and economics, with the focus on the marginal areas, those are typically spread throughout a field or on the edge of field. So they're not necessarily all in the same location. They're not the same shape and size, which can present some logistical issues when it comes to planting, harvesting, maintenance, and all of that. And then there has also been some additional challenges brought up in regard to whether or not only focusing on marginal areas will bring enough economies of scale in order to make it profitable for the farmer. And then lastly, I included a graphic here that highlights the different end uses of perennial bioenergy crops. So as you can see, there is potential for both on-farm and off-farm use. On-farm uses include using a biomass furnace, anaerobic digester, or pyrolysis kiln, and some potential off-farm uses include sending the biomass crops to biorefineries, municipal digesters, and other emerging markets. So we will be continuing to perform outreach and provide technical assistance for this project for the next few years. If you do know a producer who is interested in receiving technical assistance, please reach out to me or my colleague Marley. Our emails will be on the next slide. And then additionally, if you are interested in learning more about the Midwest Bioenergy Crop Coalition that meets virtually on a quarterly basis, please reach out to me as well. Our emails are listed here, and you should have access to these slides to review after the webinar as well. And I'm happy to answer any questions as it relates to programming aspects of the project. And then if there's anything that's more detailed related to research I discussed, I'm happy to also connect you to the appropriate folks. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Shelby. All right. We do have quite a few questions in the Q&A. So just a reminder for folks to add your questions to the Q&A, and we'll try to get to those as many as we can here. All right. let's jump in. To start off, Jake, we have some questions for you. They're all changing around here, which is great. So the first question is for Jake. How does nitrate leaching from Kernza compare to alfalfa? Do you have any insight on that?
Yes, excellent question. One of the 3 plot experiments that I showed, the one that started most recently, has the alfalfa prairie and Kernza in it. So I'll tell you some preliminary results, but the story is still unfolding. So alfalfa is a legume and it fixes nitrogen and it can actually add nitrogen to the soil. So we are seeing less nitrate in the soil water from our lysimeters beneath the Kernza than the alfalfa. But the alfalfa uses quite a bit of water with all of the cuttings. So we're in that process of doing the modeling right now to actually see whether or not leaching is any different. We are seeing that indeed there's less nitrate in the water beneath the Kernza, but still not sure if that adds actually resulting in less leaching than the alfalfa. It's important point is that Kernza uses a lot of nitrogen. It wants nitrogen, it can use quite a bit. So it's kind of a nitrogen hog. And I think I might get to that some more on one of the other questions here, but great question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Another question for you, Jake, we'll keep on you for a second. Do you have a nitrogen surplus value for fields that you target in Minnesota, surplus or value left over after crop harvest?
Yeah, we're putting together a nitrogen budget. So when we harvest the grain, farmers also harvest the straw, all of the remaining residue, and that's pretty high value. There's a lot of straw there. It has a higher nutrient density than like wheat straw. There's a higher feed value. So some producers are actually using it in rations and feeding it to animals. Others are just using it for straw. But on average, there's about 60 to 80 pounds of nitrogen that's removed with the grain and the straw at harvest. So that's a major part of that nitrogen budget. We also have to remember that there's nitrogen in the roots that are beneath the Kernza, and those roots are growing and dying and turning over. So there's some nitrogen taken up and then even sometimes released a little bit through the mineralization of dying roots. So it's a pretty complicated system being as a perennial, but we do have some of the numbers on that budget.
Great, thank you. I apologize, a train is going through in the background. Okay, Shelby, this next question is for you. It seems like there was a lot of research and pilot projects around perennial biomass about 10 years ago. But maybe it never quite scaled up, maybe because it couldn't compete with corn-based ethanol. Do you have anything changed in the process, or do you have any knowledge on like the use of perennial bioenergy crops or biomass crops?
Yeah, so there was, this person had mentioned, there was kind of a resurgence or emergence, I should say, of interest in using perennials for bioenergy of roughly about 10 years ago, but it did kind of seem to peter out a little bit. And so right now, ethanol still receives a lot more of the incentives compared to other forms of bioenergy crops, in particular for perennials. And so I think it still is a struggle that needs to be addressed on a policy level and also in the connection with the industry and the market in order to make it more feasible. As a part of this project, we are doing a preliminary market analysis to see what those demand and supplies are looking like at the moment, knowing that a lot of that research had been done quite a bit ago and the landscape has changed since then. So hopefully we'll have some more information to share out with that.
Great, thanks. Another question for Jake from Christy. Is there info on how Kernza affects phosphorus loss or leaching? Does it require phosphorus fertilization? How does it react with tile? Can it grow in non-tiled settings?
Great questions. It does not seem to be especially sensitive to low phosphorus levels. It does seem to form associations with mycorrhizal fungi, which help it acquire phosphorus, so that's a good thing. We're doing some studies right now applying different rates of phosphorus to see if there's a real yield benefit to fertilizing with phosphorus. But right now, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a concern in terms of fertility. And how does it interact with tile? In a 3 to 4 year system, we have not seen any damage to tile lines from Kernza roots. Of course, it's going to depend on the soil type, how deep the tile lines are. The Kernza does reach its peak root biomass after the first year. So those long roots are fully grown after the first year. But we've grown this on a few different farms at a few different locations in Minnesota, and so far no issues with tile line clogging. But we would like to do some more thorough investigations of that, longer term trials with the Kernza.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks. A question for Anna and Hunter from Suzanne. Will Agro-IVUS be able to model crop rotations that include perennials such as alfalfa along with row crops?
I can take this one. That's a great question, Suzanne. We have represented alfalfa with Agro-IVUS before. I think the alfalfa representation that we currently have could use a little bit more work before it would be ready for like a cover crop simulation. But yes, that is definitely a possibility, and I think that would be really interesting to look at. So.
Great. Yeah, certainly. Jake, I'm seeing a couple questions here about soil requirements for Kernza, or any research on which soil types are most suitable for Kernza production.
Yeah, I can say where it does not perform well is in soils that are prone to getting waterlogged in the spring. We like to say Kernza doesn't like its feet wet. It performs especially well in well-drained soils, those sandier soils that might be challenging for some other crops, just because it can find water pretty deep in the profile and use that effectively. So you wouldn't want to plant this in buffer areas that are going to end up getting saturated. Yeah, but otherwise it performs pretty well on most loams and farm soils that are in agriculture in the upper Midwest.
Great, that's easy to remember, doesn't like its feet wet. A question for Shelby for woody biomass. Will Argonne be performing an LCA comparing woody biomass to biofuels or biochar via pyrolysis?
For the purposes of this project, it's only a technical assistance project, so that's not included in this one. However, I can definitely pass along the inquiry to them and let them know that there is interest in this type of research to be done.
Great. Ed has another question that I think is probably interesting for Jake. For any of the Kernza test spots, were any other BMPs stacked for additional nitrate removal? He's saying such as bioreactors.
Not bioreactors, but we are looking at how other management approaches to Kernza can affect nitrate leaching. And the main one is sustaining grain yields withstand age. It's probably the biggest agronomic challenge, is that after about the third year, grain yields take a deep dive and they decrease quite a bit. And in that situation, growers are either thinking about rotating this crop out with another perennial, ideally like alfalfa, after like 3 years. Others are looking at just simply managing it as a hay crop or a forage crop, taking multiple cuttings. And then the intermediate wheatgrass can be managed that way for a number of years after the grain yield decline. But we're doing a lot of research to see if we can impose some sort of treatment onto that field to prevent the decline. And some of those treatments that we're looking at include inter-row tillage or even some prescribed fire. So we're especially curious as to whether or not that tillage might influence nitrate leaching. So we have lysimeters and some experiments with that BMP.
Great, thanks. This is probably for all of you. Have you heard in any discussions how perennials are being addressed in this year's Farm Bill? Maybe a little outside of your scope, but I will invite all of you to comment if you've heard any behind some murmurs about perennials in the Farm Bill.
I have not, but would really love to see perennials in the Farm Bill. So if there's any way that I can help with that, somebody in the audience, please let me know.
Yeah, similar to that. I know a lot of people in the Grassland 2.0 community have pushed getting perennials being talked about. There's like some lobbying work being undertaken, I guess, but yeah, I don't know at what stage that's at. Would also love to see more of it.
Great, thanks. Yeah, no, I understand that's outside of your scope. I was just curious if any of you had any thoughts. Jake, you might have answered this in your presentation, but it looks like a few of us missed it. How many pounds per acre of nitrogen fertilizer is applied to Kernza? You mentioned that for sure.
Yeah, I did mention that the BMP is at this time about 70 pounds per acre. But we're continually improving the genetics, and the plants are getting shorter and producing more seed, obviously, because that's what we're breeding for. And it's actually looking like that BMP is going to increase. We'll be releasing some new reports and publications within the next year, suggesting that that might be bumped up a little bit, closer to 80 to 100. So that's about it. Yeah, I would say 80 to 100. Sorry.
Great, thanks. So has it been explored to do nitrogen fixing complementary plants to further supplement nitrogen? Has that been discussed at all?
That's a huge part of our research program, is looking at intercropping legumes with Kernza. So we've been doing this for a number of years with a lot of different collaborators across the United States, from Cornell out to California. And we're looking at intercropping forage legumes like alfalfa and red clover, as well as even some native prairie legumes. So there's a lot of effort looking to see if we can replace our nitrogen fertilizers by legume intercropping.
Great. And then the Kernza questions continue. Two questions that are probably a little bit more for the consumer side. One is on the gluten content of Kernza. Maybe that's something to talk about in terms of consumers and looking for specific amounts of gluten, as well as maybe how to purchase seeds to grow Kernza at home. I'm not sure how common it is for Kernza to be in residential gardens or on hobby farms, etc.
Yeah, for the gluten question, it is low gluten, but not gluten-free. So it's kind of a challenge for bakers because of the low gluten content. They have a hard time getting a nice, fluffy, rising bread. So in those situations, it's usually mixed with wheat to get like something that rises. But that's not an issue for things like tortillas and chips and noodles and things like that. So for those who are intolerant, it's not gluten-free. It has gluten, it's just not very functional. And how to access seed. So if you want to, it's available commercially through a couple of seed providers, Albert Lee Seed House in Minnesota, Minnesota Native Landscapes. Those are the two who are licensed to sell Kernza. You do have to go through a licensing process to make sure that that you're growing Kernza and using that for food production, as opposed to just intermediate wheatgrass, which is the forage type. So yep, it can be found at Albert Lee Seed House or Minnesota Native Landscapes, MNL.
Great, thank you. This question is for Shelby, and I think it's similar to one we talked about before. Ed recalls a study funded by the Chesapeake Bay Fund that showed that the cost per pound of N or P removed by bioenergy crops was 10 times greater than conventional practices such as buffers or riparian buffers, but that data is close to 10 years old. Do you see a cost perspective, this premium being reduced for more competitive cost comparisons? Again, kind of that structural piece that might be preventing some or really scaling up of bioenergy.
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with this particular study, but there was a different study done by Argonne National Lab. I want to say within the last 10 years, sooner than that, to discuss that same thing, to identify the cost effectiveness of these. And they did find that while for this example, they used shrub willow, it showed that it did cost, a little bit more. Like it wasn't a net zero for farmers, or it didn't, decrease the cost or whatnot for them. But however, their cost, it was somewhat in the line with other conservation practices. So they didn't find that it was what this study showed as far as 10 times. It was maybe a tiny bit more expensive. But in this case, it was still kind of competitive with the other conservation practices.
Sure. And does that kind of account for also getting money back in terms of a profit from the biomass as well?
Yes, it included that as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, great. This is a great question. Can Kernza be grown as an interseeded cover crop in corn production systems? Could it be integrated straight in, like planting grain?
Probably not. Yeah, we've done some companion cropping type seedings with soybeans, which would be a better companion crop for it. And this is mostly about just how to get the Kernza started. So it's the fall planted crop typically. And fall, late summer is ideal. So it's actually pretty challenging to plant Kernza after corn and soybeans because we're so late in the season when those are harvested. So we're actually looked at planting both of them in the spring, especially with soybeans. And then the Kernza grows up under the understory and just kind of hangs out until the soybeans are cleared, and then opens the canopy, and then it can start growing.
Interesting.
So I wouldn't recommend that yet until we get some more data on it, but that's what we're looking into.
Yeah, but that's super interesting in terms of, interseeding those two. I think this is kind of related in terms of the time is, what's the plant hardiness zone for Kernza in terms of where obviously you're showing that it can have great success in Minnesota. What about further south?
Yeah, the limitation is, it requires vernalization. So it has to go through a winter period to send up a seed head and produce seeds, which is why we plant it in the fall. And then that next year we get grain right away. If you plant it in the spring, you won't actually get grain that first year. So the limitation is how far south we can go. Going north, it's performs better relatively in the northern parts of the US compared to the central. It's a cool season grass. So we have experiments up in Roseau, Minnesota, right on the Canadian border. There's a group in University of Manitoba doing a lot of research with Kernza as well. And then there's some groups in Sweden, quite north, who are doing a lot of research with Kernza, and it's actually taking off quite quickly as a commercial product in Sweden as well. So going north, no problem. Going south, there needs to be enough cold days for it to vernalize.
Oh, interesting. Okay, it looks like we have one last question. Is there any interaction with Virginia Tech on the programs that have been discussed? Maybe the Grassland 2.0 or the Kernza cap? Any connection with Virginia Tech?
Not that I know of, but that doesn't mean that there can't be in the future. That would be a great collaboration in my mind.
All right, great. Appreciate the question, Michael. I'm a native Virginian, so hey, we can always try to see where Virginia comes up within our Midwestern agricultural product programs. Well, thank you so much to our speakers for joining us today. 3 different looks at perennial agricultural systems and how they impact water quality. So I really appreciate everyone tuning in, and especially thank you to each of our presenters for lending their time and talent today. I did put each of their email addresses up here just one more time for folks. If you did have a question that comes up after this that you'd like to get answered, feel free to reach out to them directly. Or if you have more information about the programs, Kernza Cap, Grassland 2.0, or the Perennial Bioenergy crop program, they're great contacts for that. Just a reminder, this webinar is recorded today. We will have this recording up on our website, northcentralwater.org, sometime in the next 24 hours, as well as the PowerPoint presentations. So feel free to share it with colleagues who weren't able to attend today or refer back to it. I also want to let you know that our soil health team, the Soil Health Nexus, is hosting a webinar. They call them digital cafes. They have breakout discussions. They're hosting their next one next Wednesday, April 19th. It's going to feature Rob Myers talking about the top 10 impacts of cover crops on soil health. So I wanted to provide that notion there. If you are interested, you can sign up at soilhealthnexus.org. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Hope you have a great rest of your day.